I was 22 years old when I made the decision that would change the course of my life. I had just graduated from college with a degree in business, but like many young grads, I was unsure of where to go next. The job market wasn't exactly thriving, and every time I looked at job boards, I felt a sense of dread. I didn't want to spend my life working for someone else's dream. I wanted to build my own. Growing up, I always had a side hustle or a small business. When I was 15, I started selling handmade bracelets at the local farmer's market. In high school, I flipped items on eBay, anything from rare comic books to old sports memorabilia. So, entrepreneurship wasn't new to me, but the idea of starting something big felt overwhelming. The only thing I had on my side was a burning desire to succeed and a willingness to take risks. I decided to dive into the e-commerce world. It was 2015, and I'd been reading about people building million-dollar businesses from their laptops. I figured, if they could do it, why couldn't I? The first thing I did was research. I spent hours reading blogs, watching YouTube videos, and listening to podcasts about e-commerce and dropshipping. Everyone seemed to be pushing the idea that you could make a fortune by selling trending products with low overhead costs. I didn't have much money saved up. I had a few $1,000s from odd jobs, but I knew it wasn't enough to start a traditional business. The idea of dropshipping seemed like the perfect fit. I didn't need to buy inventory up front, and I could sell products directly from suppliers to customers. After weeks of research, I chose a niche, home fitness products. It seemed like a growing market, and at the time, health and fitness were booming, with more people looking for ways to work out at home. I spent the next few months building a website using Shopify. The process was frustrating, but I kept pushing forward. I remember the first time I launched my store. I felt a rush of excitement, but also a lot of fear. Would anyone actually buy from me? I spent even more hours perfecting my ads, trying to target the right audience on Facebook and Instagram. I tested different images, descriptions, and promotional tactics, but the sales just didn't come. At first, I thought it was just a slow start, but after a few weeks, I began to feel like I had made a huge mistake. I was spending money on ads, but the return wasn't coming. The frustration set in, and I started to doubt myself. I spent nights awake, staring at my computer screen, trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. I even thought about quitting and getting a real job, but something inside me refused to give up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was so close to something big. I decided to dive even deeper into the process, analyzing every aspect of my business. I realized that I wasn't focusing enough on my product's uniqueness. Everyone in the dropshipping world was selling the same generic products. I needed to stand out. I spent weeks searching for unique suppliers who could provide higher quality items, and I even started working with influencers on Instagram to promote my products. Slowly, I started to see traction. Sales trickled in at first, then began to pick up. But it wasn't until I had a viral moment that everything changed. It was a random Tuesday when I woke up to a notification on my phone. A viral influencer had posted one of my products on their Instagram story. The product was a portable, collapsible resistance band set. The influencer had 100K followers, and in less than 24 hours, I had hundreds of orders coming through my store. I couldn't believe it. For the first time, I was seeing what success looked like. But that was just the beginning. The influx of sales didn't stop. The next few months were a blur of constant orders and shipping. My small Shopify store went from a side project to my full-time job, and I had to hire my first employee to help with customer service and order fulfillment. The money started to roll in, but it wasn't without its challenges. Managing a business, especially one that was scaling, is no easy task. There were issues with suppliers, delayed shipments, and unhappy customers. But every challenge I faced taught me something new, and I learned to adapt quickly. After about a year of grinding, I was making a steady income that allowed me to quit my part-time job. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could do it. I had built something from nothing, and the satisfaction that came with that was worth more than any paycheck. As my business grew, I realized that I could do more. I could create a brand that wasn't just about selling products. I could build a community of people who were passionate about health and fitness. I began creating content, blog posts, workout videos, and motivational articles geared toward inspiring people to live healthier lives. The response was overwhelming, and my customer base grew exponentially. I knew I couldn't stop there. The e-commerce space was highly competitive, and I needed to differentiate myself further. I decided to create my own line of products. This was a major leap, but I was confident that it was the next step. I worked with manufacturers to design exclusive items like custom resistance bands, dumbbells, and yoga mats, all with a unique aesthetic that reflected my brand's identity. The launch of my own product line was a huge success. I had built a loyal customer base, and now I had something truly unique to offer. I started to see my brand as more than just a business, it was a lifestyle. The profits soared, and my personal brand as an entrepreneur began to gain recognition in the fitness community. People started reaching out to me for advice, asking how I had grown my business. I began mentoring other aspiring entrepreneurs, sharing my journey and lessons learned. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far I've come. From that first frustrating month of zero sales to now running a six-figure business, the journey has been anything but smooth. But the hard work, the long nights, and the constant learning have paid off. I've not only created a successful business, but I've also created a life that I'm proud of. Now, at 27, I'm living a life I could only dream about when I graduated. I've built my own brand, worked with influencers and athletes, and expanded my product line. I've even launched a podcast to help others on their entrepreneurial journeys. The freedom I've gained through my business is priceless. I get to set my own schedule, work from anywhere, and, most importantly, inspire others to chase their dreams. If I could go back and give my younger self advice, it would be simple: don't give up. It won't be easy, but the struggle is worth it. Entrepreneurship is not a straight line. It's full of twists, turns, and setbacks. But if you're willing to learn from every failure and keep pushing forward, you will eventually get to where you want to be. So, if you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, take the leap. It won't be easy, and it might take longer than you expect, but it's worth it. The journey is long, but the rewards are worth every step. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I always thought entrepreneurship was for people who had it all figured out. You know the type: charismatic, brilliant, always 2 steps ahead of the game. I was none of those things. My name is Jake, and I wasn't born into wealth, didn't have any special connections, and certainly wasn't some tech genius. But despite all of that, I found myself building a successful business. Here's my story, and how I went from being a broke 25-year-old with a side hustle to owning a thriving company. When I graduated from college, I had big dreams, but very little direction. I majored in marketing, but honestly, I didn't even know what that truly meant in the real world. My first job out of college was a sales position at a mid-sized tech company. The pay was decent, but the job wasn't fulfilling, and I hated the idea of being stuck in an office, pushing products I didn't believe in. I started a side hustle. It wasn't glamorous, and honestly, it wasn't even close to innovative, but it was a start. I began selling custom-designed t-shirts online. I used basic graphic design skills I learned from college, a print-on-demand service, and a Shopify store to launch my idea. It didn't look pretty at first. No fancy branding, no sleek designs, just me working late nights and trying to figure out how to market my product. But I was determined. In the beginning, I barely made enough money to cover the cost of the shirts. I would get an order here and there, and when I did, it felt like winning the lottery. But as the months went on, I started figuring out what worked. I understood how to market through social media, how to design better graphics, and most importantly, how to reach the right audience. I learned that it wasn't just about selling products. It was about building a brand that resonated with people. I remember my first big breakthrough. I decided to create a limited edition series of shirts featuring motivational quotes and positive affirmations. I posted it on Instagram, ran a couple of targeted ads, and waited. To my surprise, the shirts started selling like crazy. In 1 week, I sold more than I had in the previous 6 months combined. The feeling of those first big sales was unlike anything I had experienced before. It was validation. It was proof that I wasn't just wasting my time. But success didn't come easy. For every breakthrough, there was a failure waiting around the corner. The supply chain issues were constant. One time, a printing mistake led to dozens of orders being shipped with the wrong designs. Customers were unhappy, and I had to eat the cost of replacement shirts. It was a painful hit to my wallet, but I learned a valuable lesson. Always triple-check your work. Mistakes are costly, but they're also the best teachers. As my side hustle continued to grow, I faced a dilemma. I was still working my full-time job, but I was spending more time on my t-shirt business than I was on anything else. The grind was exhausting, and I knew that if I wanted to take my business to the next level, I needed to make a decision. I could either continue working my 9 to 5 and keep the business as a side project, or I could take the leap and go all in. It was a terrifying thought. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have savings that would carry me through a rough patch. But one night, after yet another 12-hour workday, I realized that if I didn't take the leap now, I might never do it. So I quit my job. That decision was one of the scariest things I've ever done. Without a steady paycheck, there was a huge amount of uncertainty hanging over me. But at the same time, there was a spark of excitement. I was doing it. I was going to make this work, no matter what. For the first few months, it was a hustle. I poured everything I had, time, money, energy, into my business. I stayed up late working on designs, refining my marketing strategies, and learning everything I could about e-commerce. The learning curve was steep. I made mistakes, wasted money, and felt like I was failing more than I was succeeding. But every small win kept me going. A positive customer review, a successful Facebook ad campaign, a viral post on Instagram. These little victories fueled me. The real turning point came when I started collaborating with influencers. At first, it was just a few small Instagrammers with a couple thousand followers. But as I learned the ropes of influencer marketing, I began working with bigger influencers who had tens of thousands of followers. This was a game changer. My brand reached new audiences, and sales skyrocketed. It wasn't just about the money. It was about building a community. The people who bought my shirts weren't just customers. They were part of something bigger. I got messages from people telling me how the motivational quotes on the shirts inspired them to make positive changes in their lives. They weren't just buying t-shirts. They were buying into the message, into the story I was telling. Fast forward to today, and my business is thriving. I have a team that handles customer service, product design, and logistics, allowing me to focus on growth and strategy. I've expanded into other products, hoodies, mugs, phone cases, you name it, and my brand has become a household name in the niche I'm in. I still can't believe how far I've come, but I know I wouldn't be here without taking that initial risk and working through the countless obstacles. But even with all the success, I've never lost sight of what got me here: persistence and the willingness to learn. I'm not a genius. I'm not some tech wunderkind. But I've learned that success in business is less about luck and more about staying consistent, learning from your mistakes, and having the courage to keep going, even when everything feels like it's falling apart. Looking back, it's hard to believe that the shy, uncertain kid who started this journey just a few years ago is the same person I am now. But the one thing that hasn't changed is my belief that anyone, no matter their background or skill set, can build something great if they're willing to work for it. The road to success isn't linear, and it's certainly not easy. But if you're passionate about what you're doing and willing to put in the effort, it's possible to create something incredible. So, if you're sitting there wondering if you have what it takes to start your own business, I'll tell you this: you do. The hardest part is taking that first step. After that, it's all about sticking with it and learning as you go. And remember, failure isn't the end. It's just part of the journey. I always thought entrepreneurship was for people who had it all together, the ones with flashy ideas and a constant stream of success. I never saw myself as one of those people. I was the quiet, overcautious type, the person who avoided risks at all costs. My story, though, shows that anyone can take the leap, even if they're not the risk takers everyone expects them to be. I was working as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company. The job was decent, good salary, great benefits, and a solid group of people to work with. But it never felt like I was making a real impact. It felt like I was a cog in a machine. One day, after a particularly draining meeting where my suggestions were brushed aside for the 5th time, I found myself walking to the coffee machine, staring out the window and thinking, there has to be more than this. That thought haunted me for days. I was grateful for my job, but it wasn't fulfilling. I wanted to create something of my own, something I could look at every day and say, I built that. I didn't know what that something would be yet, but I knew I had to try. That's when I stumbled upon an idea while scrolling through Reddit late one night. Someone posted about how people were struggling to organize their daily schedules. They mentioned using a variety of tools, like sticky notes, digital apps, and spreadsheets, but none seemed to work perfectly. The comments quickly turned into a discussion about how difficult it was to stay organized in a fast-paced world. That's when it hit me. What if I could build an app that integrated all these different tools and allowed people to manage their day more effectively? I wasn't an app developer at the time, just a coder, but I had enough technical knowledge to dive in. I spent every free moment after work learning about mobile app development. I enrolled in online courses, watched YouTube tutorials, and read books on UX/UI design. I also started researching the market, looking for similar apps, trying to identify gaps and flaws in what was already out there. It became clear that while there were plenty of task management apps, none of them quite integrated everything in the way people wanted. But the road from idea to execution was rocky. My first prototype was, to put it lightly, a disaster. The interface was clunky, and the functionality didn't work as I had imagined. I realized I needed help, so I reached out to a few friends who were experienced in app development. They all said the same thing. It's going to be a lot of work, but if you believe in this idea, we can make it happen. I still remember the first time I showed my friends the second version of the app. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. They were impressed and agreed to help me test it further. At that point, I was already deep into the process, but there was still a huge question in the back of my mind. How would I turn this into a real business? The answer came when I started thinking about the financial aspect. I had no savings to fall back on, and the idea of quitting my steady job terrified me. But I wasn't about to give up either. I began looking for ways to fund my project. I pitched the idea to a few angel investors, but the responses were discouraging. They wanted more proof that people would actually use the app. They weren't ready to take a chance on something unproven. I didn't let that stop me. Instead, I turned to crowdfunding. I spent weeks perfecting a pitch video, showing off my app's features and how it could make people's lives easier. I created a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter, hoping to raise the initial funds I needed to take the app to the next level. The first few days were nerve-wracking. No one was pledging. I thought I might have made a huge mistake. But then, something surprising happened. As the campaign started to gain some traction, the pledges began to roll in. People were excited about the app. They saw the potential. Within a month, I had raised enough money to not only continue development, but also hire a small team of designers and marketers. Despite the small success, things were far from smooth. There were endless late nights of coding, debugging, and testing. My relationships with family and friends were strained because I was constantly working on the app. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and even holidays just to meet deadlines. At times, I questioned whether it was all worth it. The stress of balancing my day job with building a business felt overwhelming. But every time I felt like giving up, I thought about the people who were relying on me to make the app a reality. I launched the app on the App Store and Google Play Store in early 2020, hoping it would catch on. The first month was brutal. I didn't have a big marketing budget, so most of the downloads came from word of mouth and a few posts I made on Reddit and other forums. But then, something incredible happened. People started to leave positive reviews. The app wasn't perfect, but users appreciated the thought I had put into it. They liked the clean design, the integration with other tools, and the way it simplified their daily routines. That was my turning point. I knew the app had potential. Over the next few months, I worked on adding new features and improving the ones that were already in place. Slowly, the user base grew. I hired more people, expanded the team, and eventually left my full-time job to focus solely on the business. By 2022, the app had reached over 1 million downloads. It was still a small player compared to the giants in the productivity space, but it had carved out its own niche. More importantly, it was turning a profit. Looking back, I realized the journey wasn't just about building a product. It was about building resilience. There were so many times when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But in the end, I learned that you don't have to be fearless to succeed in business. You just need to keep moving forward, even when you're scared. Now, my life looks very different from what it did a few years ago. I have a team of talented individuals working with me, and we're continuing to improve the app. But more than that, I've learned the value of perseverance and believing in your vision, even when it feels like the world is telling you it's impossible. So, to anyone out there who feels like they're not the type of person who can be an entrepreneur, take it from me. You don't have to have all the answers or be the most confident person in the room. You just need to take that first step, and the rest will follow. I started my business with $500 and a simple idea: create a platform that connects local businesses with customers looking for unique, handmade items. I had no prior experience in tech, marketing, or even business in general, but I was determined to make it work. This is the story of how I built my company from the ground up, learned from my mistakes, and turned a small idea into a thriving business. It all began when I moved to a small town a few years ago. I noticed that there were a lot of local artisans and small businesses around, but most of them were struggling to reach new customers. I saw handmade crafts, art, and products in local shops, but many of these businesses had no online presence at all. On the other hand, customers seemed to have difficulty finding these unique products, often resorting to mass-produced items from big box stores instead. It didn't make sense to me, and I knew I had an idea that could solve this problem. I wasn't sure how to start, but I had a small amount of savings, just enough to build a simple website. I used a platform called WordPress and found a basic template that allowed me to create an online marketplace. The vision was simple. I wanted to provide a space where local artisans could showcase and sell their products to a broader audience while giving customers an easy way to find unique items they couldn't get anywhere else. My first hurdle was convincing local business owners to join. They weren't tech-savvy and most of them had no idea what an online marketplace was. At first, they were reluctant to sign up, but I kept pushing. I offered them free listings for the first month and assured them that there was no risk. Slowly, more and more businesses came on board, and my website began to take shape. However, things were not smooth sailing right away. I quickly learned that just having a website wasn't enough. I had no customers, and no one knew about my platform. I had put all my energy into building the site, but I hadn't considered marketing it. I realized that I needed to find a way to get people to visit my site. I had very little money left to spend on ads, so I had to be resourceful. I started by posting on local Facebook groups and engaging with community members. I would attend local events, set up booths, and hand out flyers with my website information. It was slow, but over time, I began to build a small but loyal following. I also worked on search engine optimization, SEO, to improve my website's visibility on Google. I spent hours reading blogs and watching YouTube tutorials on SEO, trying to figure out how to make my site more discoverable. Gradually, it started to pay off. But then came another challenge, payment processing. I didn't know much about e-commerce back then, and I didn't understand how important it was to have a reliable payment system. I initially used PayPal for transactions, but it wasn't ideal. There were issues with payment delays, and sometimes customers would dispute charges. I spent hours dealing with frustrated customers and refund requests, and it felt like a never-ending cycle. That was when I realized I needed a more secure and professional payment processor. I switched to Stripe, and though it took a while to get everything set up properly, the results were worth it. Payments started to go through more smoothly, and I felt like my business was finally becoming more legitimate. However, I soon discovered that I still had many areas to improve. My website was still basic, and customers were having trouble navigating it. The checkout process was clunky, and there were bugs that would cause the site to crash. I wasn't making much money, but I was learning at an exponential rate. I decided to invest what little I had left into hiring a developer to fix these issues. I found a freelancer who helped me revamp the entire website, improving the user interface and making it mobile-friendly. The difference was night and day. Customers started spending more time on the site, and my conversion rate improved. As my business grew, I started to get feedback from both customers and business owners. While the platform was doing okay, it became clear that there were things I hadn't thought of. For example, the shipping process was a huge pain point. Most of the artisans didn't have the infrastructure to handle shipping on their own, so I had to find a solution. I partnered with a local shipping company and started offering flat-rate shipping to make things easier for everyone. As more businesses joined my platform, I also realized that I needed to build a brand. I wanted my platform to be known for its quality and unique selection of products, and I started working on ways to create that brand identity. I hired a graphic designer to create a logo and professional branding materials, and I focused on creating a consistent and engaging voice on social media. Slowly, but surely, people started to recognize my brand, and word of mouth helped my business grow. By the end of the first year, I had reached a point where my revenue was enough to support myself. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to show me that this business could work. I expanded beyond the local market and started offering my platform to artisans from other parts of the country. My website traffic grew, and I was finally starting to turn a profit. Now, a few years later, my platform has grown into a full-fledged business. We have hundreds of artisans selling their products, and I have a team of employees who help with customer service, marketing, and development. We've launched an app, and I've learned how to scale the business while keeping the personal touch that made it so special in the beginning. The journey has been far from easy, and there have been times when I thought about giving up. But every challenge I faced taught me something new and made me more determined to succeed. Looking back, I realized that success in business is not just about having a great idea. It's about persistence, learning from your mistakes, and constantly adapting to new challenges. I still have a long way to go, but I'm proud of what I've built. And if you're thinking about starting a business, just know that it's not going to be easy, but it's definitely worth it. I've always been a dreamer, but I never really considered myself an entrepreneur until I stumbled upon an opportunity that would change everything. My story isn't the typical overnight success. In fact, it was filled with struggles, failures, and a lot of moments where I thought about quitting. But if you're willing to keep pushing through, you can transform your dreams into something real. This is how I went from a broke college student with no real direction to owning a company that's thriving today. It all started in my sophomore year of college. I was studying marketing, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I was living off ramen noodles, scraping by on part-time jobs, and watching my friends figure out their futures while I felt stuck. I had the usual fears. What if I'm not good enough? And what if I fail? I didn't know anyone who had started their own business, and honestly, I didn't even know where to begin. It was a late night in the library when I stumbled across an article about online businesses. At the time, I didn't know much about the world of e-commerce, but something about it clicked with me. The idea that you could start a business from nothing and run it from your laptop intrigued me. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to take control of my future, especially since I had no money to invest in anything traditional. I started researching everything I could about e-commerce. I learned about dropshipping, how to build websites, digital marketing, and the ins and outs of customer service. It was overwhelming, but I was determined to learn. I spent every free moment I had after class watching YouTube tutorials, reading blog posts, and practicing the skills I was learning. It felt like my brain was on fire from all the new information, but at the same time, it felt exhilarating. My first idea was to sell custom t-shirts. I thought, how hard could it be? I designed a few graphics, set up an online store, and launched it. I was excited, but that excitement quickly turned to disappointment when my store made 0 sales in the first month. At first, I thought it was just a fluke. Maybe I didn't market it well enough, or perhaps I just needed to give it more time. But after a few months of the same result, I was forced to face the truth. My first venture had failed. I could have given up, but instead, I took a step back and reevaluated everything. I spent time studying what went wrong with my t-shirt business. The product wasn't the problem. The issue was my marketing. I had no audience, no real brand identity, and no clear message that resonated with anyone. I learned that simply having a product wasn't enough. I needed to build a connection with my customers and offer something they truly wanted. I decided to pivot. Instead of trying to sell products that everyone else was selling, I started looking for a niche. After hours of research, I found a gap in the market: eco-friendly, reusable products. With the growing concern over environmental issues, I knew there was a demand for sustainable goods. I focused on eco-friendly alternatives to everyday products like straws, utensils, and water bottles. It wasn't an easy road. I spent months perfecting my product offerings, finding suppliers, and creating a brand that stood for something meaningful. I also knew I had to market differently this time. I started building an email list, creating social media content that aligned with my values, and partnering with influencers who shared my vision. Slowly but surely, sales started trickling in. It was an instant success, but I was making progress, and that was enough to keep me going. The real turning point came when I decided to launch a YouTube channel. I realized that people wanted to see the story behind the brand. They wanted to connect with me as a person, not just as a business. I filmed my journey of starting the business, shared my challenges, and gave tips on sustainable living. My channel wasn't just about selling products. It was about building a community of like-minded individuals who cared about the environment and wanted to make a difference. Over time, my YouTube following grew, and so did my sales. The more transparent I was with my audience, the more they trusted me. I started getting messages from people saying they'd never bought eco-friendly products before, but because they felt connected to me, they were willing to give it a try. This was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. I realized that entrepreneurship isn't just about selling a product. It's about building trust, offering value, and creating a brand that people can believe in. With the steady growth of my YouTube channel and social media platforms, I was able to reinvest into my business. I expanded my product range, improved my website, and hired a small team to help with operations. For the first time, I felt like I was on the right track. My sales were growing exponentially, and my customer base was loyal. The best part? I was finally able to quit my part-time job and work on my business full-time. But even when things were going well, I faced new challenges. The e-commerce landscape was constantly changing, and I had to keep up with trends, algorithms, and customer demands. There were times when I felt burnt out and overwhelmed. But every time I wanted to give up, I reminded myself of why I started this journey, to create something meaningful and to have control over my own future. Looking back, I realized that my journey wasn't a straight path. I failed, learned, and adjusted along the way. But the lessons I learned about perseverance, adaptability, and trust have shaped the entrepreneur I am today. My business is no longer just a small project. It's a fully fledged company that continues to grow and impact people's lives. I've learned that being an entrepreneur isn't about being perfect. It's about embracing the grind, being open to learning from mistakes, and staying true to your vision. And most importantly, it's about creating a brand that people can relate to and trust. Today, my company is thriving, and I'm finally living the life I always dreamed of. To anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, my advice is simple. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because it doesn't exist. Start now, learn as you go, and don't be afraid to fail. Every failure is just another lesson, and each lesson brings you closer to success. So, yeah, it hasn't been an easy road, but it's been worth every step. If I can do it, so can you. I had always been the kind of person who looked for opportunities, even in places that most people would overlook. But my entrepreneurial journey wasn't a straightforward success story. In fact, it began with what seemed like an embarrassing failure. It was 2016, and I was in my final year of college, grappling with the uncertainty of what I was supposed to do after graduation. I knew I didn't want to work for anyone else. The idea of sitting behind a desk, clocking in and out, made me feel like I was suffocating. So, I started dabbling in side projects. I tried dropshipping, affiliate marketing, and even made a few attempts at creating a mobile app. But nothing really took off. I had some successes here and there, but nothing that could be considered life-changing. After graduation, I found myself living with my parents in a small town, feeling more lost than ever. My friends had all moved to big cities to start their careers, and I was stuck. It wasn't that I didn't want to try. I just didn't know where to start. That's when I started focusing more on the things that didn't require a significant amount of startup capital. I began researching local needs and services that people often overlooked. One day, as I was driving around town, I noticed an old, rundown building that had been vacant for months. It was a small strip mall, and the businesses that used to operate there had all shut down. I remember thinking to myself, what if I could turn this place into something different? Something people would actually use. The idea stuck with me. I'd seen the rise of co-working spaces in larger cities and thought, why not here? My town wasn't huge, but it was a place where people were starting to work remotely more often, and I figured it could be a good fit. At the time, I had very little money, and the idea of taking on a commercial lease for a building seemed insane. But I didn't let that deter me. I spent weeks researching how co-working spaces operated, what people needed, and what made them successful. I scoured the internet for advice, visited other co-working spaces, and reached out to people who had experience in the industry. Eventually, I got the courage to reach out to the owner of the building. He was an older gentleman who had been trying to sell the place for a while but hadn't found a buyer. I explained my idea to him and asked if he'd be willing to rent it to me. To my surprise, he was intrigued. I pitched the idea that I would turn it into a low-cost co-working space, catering to remote workers, freelancers, and small businesses in the area. I told him I'd pay him rent on a month-to-month basis, which seemed like a fair compromise given that I was new to this. He agreed. The next few months were a blur of planning, renovations, and stress. I didn't have enough money to hire contractors, so I did most of the work myself. I spent days tearing down old wallpaper, fixing leaks, and painting walls. It was hard work, but I felt alive for the first time in months. This was my chance to build something, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. I had no experience running a business. I had no investors. All I had was my determination and a small savings account that had been built up from years of freelance work. I figured if things didn't work out, I could always find another job. But I had a gut feeling that this could be it. I just had to make it work. I decided to market the space through social media, local online groups, and word of mouth. I didn't have a big advertising budget, so I used what I had, my energy and creativity. I posted before and after pictures of the space, shared progress updates, and offered free trials to the first few people who signed up. Slowly but surely, people started coming in. The first month was tough. I had just a few members, but each person was a victory. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep going. Over time, the co-working space grew. I added better internet, hosted networking events, and began collaborating with local businesses to offer discounts and services to members. I remember one day, a local coffee shop owner reached out to me and asked if they could provide free coffee for my members in exchange for exposure. It was a small win, but it made me realize that the local community wanted to support something like this. 6 months in, the space was almost full. I had enough revenue to cover rent, utilities, and even hire a part-time assistant to help with operations. The place started to feel like a hub for freelancers and entrepreneurs who were looking for a place to work but didn't want the isolation of working from home. Members were collaborating, exchanging ideas, and even launching their own businesses within the space. Then came the breakthrough. One of the members, a software developer, introduced me to a venture capitalist who had been looking for co-working spaces to invest in. After a series of meetings and a lot of back and forth, they offered to buy a stake in my business. It was an offer I couldn't refuse. The investment allowed me to expand the co-working space, improve the facilities, and even hire a full-time community manager. By the time 2019 rolled around, the business had completely transformed. I had 3 locations, a team of 8 employees, and hundreds of members. We had become the go-to place for remote workers in the area. I was making more money than I ever imagined, but the most rewarding part was knowing that I had built something from the ground up. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, times when I questioned if it was worth the effort, but I kept pushing forward. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. The journey hasn't been linear, and there were countless obstacles along the way. But every challenge taught me something new. My advice to anyone thinking about starting a business is simple. Don't be afraid to start small, and don't be afraid to fail. The road to success is rarely smooth, but if you keep pushing, you'll get there. Now, when I look at my business, I see a space where people from all walks of life come together to work, collaborate, and grow. It's a place that I created, and it continues to evolve every day. I'm no longer the person I was back in 2016, unsure of what the future held. I've learned that with persistence, creativity, and a little bit of luck, you can turn any idea into a reality. It's been a long, tough journey, but I wouldn't change a thing. I always believed that success was a straight line. Work hard, do the right things, and you'll get there. It wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I realized the path to success is full of unexpected detours and lessons that only come from failure. It all started in 2015 when I was 23 years old. Fresh out of college, I had this idea for an app that would connect freelancers with small businesses. I was determined to build it, convinced that it was the next big thing. I didn't know much about coding, but I knew I could learn, and that was enough for me. I spent weeks teaching myself basic programming, staying up late into the night reading forums, and watching YouTube videos. By the summer of 2016, I had something that I thought was amazing, a working prototype of my app. I pitched it to a few investors, and to my surprise, one of them bit. He was a seasoned entrepreneur who had successfully launched a tech startup a few years earlier. He saw the potential in my idea and promised me funding if I could prove there was market demand. He gave me $50,000 as an initial investment. But there was a catch. I had 3 months to get traction, or the deal was off. Those 3 months were some of the most intense, exhausting, and exhilarating of my life. I didn't sleep much, worked 16-hour days, and kept thinking about how I was about to live my dream. I hired a small team, including a couple of developers and a marketing guy. We worked from my tiny apartment, which quickly became a makeshift office. But reality hit hard. The first version of the app was buggy and clunky. Users hated it, and we got almost no traction. My marketing guy tried everything from Facebook ads to influencer partnerships, but nothing worked. We barely managed to scrape together a few hundred users. My investor was getting frustrated, and so was I. I remember one night, sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop, feeling like I was on the verge of giving up. Then came the moment that would change everything. My best friend, Mike, came over for dinner one evening. He was working in finance at the time and had no real experience in tech, but he had always been someone I could rely on for a fresh perspective. I vented to him about everything: the failed launches, the bugs, the lack of user engagement. Mike listened, and after a long pause, he asked, "What if you're building the wrong thing?" At first, I was offended. How could I be building the wrong thing? I had a vision. I had invested everything into this app, and I had even secured funding. But Mike's words gnawed at me all night. What if he was right? What if there was a deeper issue I was missing? The next morning, I started over. I spent a week just talking to users, real people, not the ones I'd gotten from Facebook ads or influencers. I sent emails to everyone who had downloaded the app and asked them what they really wanted. I called small business owners, freelancers, and even competitors. Slowly, I started to see a pattern. While my app was solving a problem for freelancers, it was missing the mark when it came to businesses that needed reliable, easy-to-use solutions for managing projects. They didn't need a marketplace. They needed an all-in-one management tool. I scrapped the idea of connecting freelancers and businesses and pivoted to a project management software that catered to small businesses. It was a massive change, and I had no idea if it would work, but I had to try. The problem was that I had already burned through most of the initial funding and was running out of time. I focused on building something simple, a clean interface, easy-to-use task management, and time tracking. I made sure the software could integrate with other tools that businesses already used, like email and calendars. Instead of throwing all my resources into ads and influencer deals, I spent every waking hour networking. I cold called local businesses and offered them free trials. I attended small business conferences, talked to entrepreneurs at coffee shops, and asked for feedback. The more people I talked to, the more I learned about what they needed. Finally, in early 2017, things started to click. Users began to leave positive feedback. Small business owners were using the app to manage their teams and clients, and they were finding it useful. Word of mouth started spreading, and more businesses signed up. My investor, who had been on the verge of pulling the plug, saw the growth and was impressed. He agreed to give me another round of funding, but this time, it came with more expectations. I had 6 months to scale, or he would back out completely. With the new funds, I hired more developers, improved the app's features, and began focusing on refining the user experience. I also focused on retention, getting users to stay and continue using the app. I rolled out a more robust customer support system and added new features that users had been asking for, like team collaboration tools and a mobile app. By the end of 2017, the business had gained traction. We had 5,000 active users, and the app had become a vital part of several small businesses' daily operations. In 2018, we started charging for premium features, and by 2019, we had grown to over 50,000 users. That's when we caught the attention of a major player in the tech industry, a large SaaS company looking to acquire smaller startups in the project management space. After months of negotiations, we were acquired for $5 million. It felt surreal. I had gone from nearly losing everything to building a company worth millions. But the road to success was anything but smooth. It was filled with rejection, failure, and moments of doubt. It was only because I learned to listen to my customers, pivot when necessary, and keep pushing forward that I was able to find success. Looking back, I realized the most important lesson I learned wasn't how to code or how to secure funding. It was how to adapt and listen. If I had stuck to my original idea, I would have failed. But by being open to change and truly understanding my users, I was able to build something that made a difference. Success isn't just about having the best idea. It's about being willing to learn from mistakes and keep evolving. Now, in 2025, I'm on a new venture. I've spent the last few years working on a new project, and while I don't know where it will lead, I do know that no matter what happens, I will be okay. Because I've learned that every setback is just a setup for a bigger comeback. So, if you're out there struggling with your own business, remember this. The road to success is never a straight line. Keep going, keep listening, and keep evolving. You never know what's around the corner. I never thought I'd be telling this story. In fact, I used to joke with my friends about how I'd never end up as some big shot entrepreneur, always claiming, I'll just live a normal life and figure it out. But somehow, life had other plans, and now, 5 years later, I run a 7-figure business. Let me take you back to where it all started. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business. It was a quiet place, but not exactly the best for someone who wanted to build something big. My family wasn't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. We got by, and my parents always emphasized the value of hard work and education. That's where I found my passion, not in the classroom, but in the side projects I was always working on. From a young age, I was fascinated by technology. In high school, while my classmates were into sports or partying, I was the weird kid who spent hours in front of a computer figuring out how websites worked, playing with code, and trying to build something useful. I didn't really have a clear direction, but I knew I was hooked on the idea of creating something out of nothing. It wasn't until college that the first seed for entrepreneurship was planted. I was studying computer science at a state university, but I quickly realized that sitting in lecture halls and doing assignments wasn't the best use of my time. My real learning came from side hustles. I'd been working as a freelance web designer for a couple of years, building websites for local businesses, and that's where I started making real money. In the beginning, I'd just charge a few $100 per website, and I didn't really think much of it. But as the requests kept coming, I realized that if I wanted to scale up, I couldn't keep doing everything myself. So, I took a leap of faith. I hired my first employee, a college buddy who was skilled in graphic design, and together we started offering more comprehensive services. We'd design logos, manage social media accounts, and even help businesses with their SEO. It was a great gig, but I was still stuck in that mentality of just getting by, doing the work, and making money. It was only after I graduated that things started to get interesting. I had a decision to make. Should I stick with freelance work and take the steady path, or should I go all in on building a business? I was young, I had little to lose, and I was hungry for success, so I decided to take the risk. I took out a small loan, rented a tiny office space, and officially started my company. The first few months were rough. I didn't know what I was doing half the time. I barely had enough clients to cover rent, let alone pay myself, and I was juggling everything from marketing to finances to customer service. It was exhausting. But then came the breakthrough, or at least what I now see as the breakthrough. One of my clients, a local restaurant, came to me with a problem. They needed a way to accept online orders, but their current system was outdated and unreliable. It was a simple idea, but it was a game changer. I spent the next few weeks building a basic online ordering system that could integrate with their existing POS system. When I showed it to them, their eyes lit up. They loved it. They immediately wanted to sign up for the service, and the next thing I knew, I had my first real product, a software solution for small businesses. It was nothing fancy, just a simple tool to help restaurants streamline their online ordering, but it worked. At first, it was just that one client. But over time, I started pitching the software to more and more small businesses, and the demand grew. I eventually hired a small team of developers to help me refine the software, adding new features and making it more scalable. That's when things really took off. Our client base exploded, and I was finally able to hire more employees and focus on growth. I was building something tangible, something that wasn't just dependent on me freelancing my way to success. But even as the business grew, the challenges didn't stop. I had to learn how to handle not just the technical side of things, but also the leadership, sales, marketing, and customer support. There were plenty of sleepless nights, failed product iterations, and moments when I wondered if I'd made the right choice. But through all of it, I kept pushing forward. I surrounded myself with people who knew more than I did in areas where I was weak, and I started focusing on creating a company culture that valued innovation, transparency, and hard work. Looking back, I can point to a handful of key moments that really made a difference. The first was when we landed a deal with a regional restaurant chain. It was a huge win for us, and it gave us the credibility we needed to expand. Then, we invested heavily in marketing, not just traditional ads, but content marketing, customer success stories, and partnerships with influencers in the restaurant space. Our customer base grew from a handful of local businesses to hundreds of clients across the country. The second key moment was when I realized that we had a real opportunity to scale. We took a hard look at our operations and decided to pivot from just being a service provider to a SaaS, software as a service, company. This meant building recurring revenue, which provided us with the stability to keep investing in the business. The transition wasn't easy, but it paid off. Today, our company serves thousands of small businesses, and we've expanded our product offerings to include inventory management, staff scheduling, and even loyalty programs. We've raised a couple of rounds of funding, and I've had the privilege of speaking at conferences and mentoring other entrepreneurs. It's surreal to think about how far we've come from that tiny office in a small town, where I was just trying to make ends meet. But none of this would have been possible without those early days of struggle, learning, and failure. If I'd given up when things were tough or stuck with just freelancing, I wouldn't have built what I have now. The lesson I learned is simple. Entrepreneurship isn't about getting everything right from the start. It's about adapting, learning, and never giving up. I've seen a lot of people on this journey, and what I've realized is that success isn't a straight path. There are ups and downs, moments where you feel like you're on top of the world, and others where it seems like the whole thing is about to collapse. But as long as you're willing to keep going and learn from your mistakes, you'll eventually get to a place where you can look back and be proud of what you've built. I guess the moral of the story is this. If you have a vision, take the risk. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because that moment never comes. Jump in, do the work, learn from the failures, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. It's a tough road, but when you finally make it, it's worth every ounce of effort. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I never thought my entrepreneurial journey would begin from a crumpled receipt, a half-empty cup of coffee, and a moment of sheer frustration. But as I sit back now and look at the chaos I once faced, I can't help but smile at how far I've come. Let me start from the beginning. It was 2017, and I was working a regular 9-to-5 job in a cubicle at a marketing agency. I had a decent salary, a comfortable life, but I wasn't happy. I had the nagging feeling that I was meant for something more. The problem was, I didn't know what that something more was. I had no big dreams, no radical ideas. I was just going through the motions, waiting for something to inspire me. One Thursday afternoon, I was at my usual cafe, grabbing my coffee and trying to get a little work done. The cafe was my escape from the office, a place where I could clear my mind. On that particular day, the usual serenity was interrupted by a conversation I overheard. Two young men were sitting at the table next to me, chatting animatedly about a business they had just launched. They were talking about e-commerce, dropshipping, and how they made their first $1,000 in sales in a single week. I could feel my heart racing. I tried to ignore them, but their excitement was contagious. I started listening more closely. The conversation went on about how they used social media ads, optimized their product pages, and built a small brand out of thin air. All they did was identify a niche product, source it from suppliers, and market it through Facebook and Instagram. They weren't tech wizards. They were just regular guys who figured out a way to make money online. It was then that it clicked for me. I had always heard about dropshipping, but never paid much attention to it. However, hearing real people talk about how they were actually doing it lit a fire inside me. The idea of running a business from anywhere, without worrying about inventory or warehouses, was incredibly appealing. I wanted in. That night, I went home and researched everything I could about dropshipping. I watched videos, read blog posts, and browsed forums. I learned the basics, finding products, suppliers, setting up an online store, and marketing. It sounded simple enough, but the more I dug, the more I realized how much work would be involved. I spent weeks experimenting with different product niches, setting up websites, and learning about Facebook ads. At first, things didn't go as planned. My first store was a disaster. I picked a niche that seemed interesting, phone accessories, but there were so many competitors. It was nearly impossible to stand out. I spent money on ads, but got nothing in return. It was a humbling experience, but it didn't break me. In fact, it motivated me to keep going. I made some adjustments. I pivoted to a different niche, sustainable home products. It was a smaller market, but one that was growing rapidly. I found a few suppliers, launched a new store, and refined my marketing strategy. I put in hours perfecting the product descriptions, optimizing my website for conversions, and running more targeted ads. Slowly but surely, things started to click. I remember the first time I made a sale. I was at work, sitting at my desk, when my phone buzzed. Sale $39.99 flashed on the screen. My heart stopped for a second. I couldn't believe it. I had made a sale while I was sitting in a cubicle, just doing my regular job. It felt surreal. That moment fueled my determination. The next few weeks were a blur. Sales trickled in, slowly at first, but then the momentum started building. I couldn't keep up with the demand, and I had to spend every waking hour making tweaks to my ads and website. By the end of my first month, I had made over $1,000 in sales. Not huge by any means, but it was enough to prove that I was on the right path. The real breakthrough came when I learned how to scale my business. I had a few products that were performing really well, and I knew I needed to double down on them. I invested more money into ads, hired a freelance designer to create better visuals, and streamlined my operations. I began to see profits consistently, and I was finally able to quit my day job. It was one of the scariest decisions I ever made, but also the most liberating. By the time 2018 rolled around, my business was booming. I had a full-fledged e-commerce operation running, with a steady stream of income coming in. I expanded my product offerings, brought in more suppliers, and even hired a small team to help with customer service and order fulfillment. I went from being a one-man operation to managing a growing business. But success came with its own set of challenges. As I scaled up, I faced new obstacles. Shipping delays, supplier issues, and customer complaints became part of my daily grind. I learned the hard way that running a business is never as easy as it looks from the outside. However, each problem was a lesson in disguise. I learned how to negotiate better deals with suppliers, improve my customer service processes, and fine-tune my marketing strategies. By 2019, my company was generating six figures in revenue annually. I had achieved more than I ever imagined in such a short period of time. I could now afford to invest in other ventures, and my entrepreneurial mindset shifted. I realized that my success was not just about running one business. It was about creating a mindset of continuous growth and learning. In 2020, I launched a second business, a subscription box service for eco-friendly products. I took everything I had learned from dropshipping and applied it to a new model. This time, I was smarter. I had a clearer vision of what I wanted to build. The subscription box business became a huge hit, and it allowed me to diversify my income streams even further. The most rewarding part of this journey, though, wasn't the money. It was the freedom and flexibility. I now had the time to travel, work from anywhere, and spend more time with my family. I was no longer bound by the walls of an office or the constraints of a traditional job. Fast forward to today, and I'm proud to say that I've built not one, but two thriving businesses. I've learned countless lessons along the way, and I continue to grow as an entrepreneur. There are days when I still feel like an imposter, but I've come to understand that those feelings are just part of the journey. Success isn't a destination. It's the process of becoming who you were always meant to be. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I will never stop learning, growing, and pushing myself to be better. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start now, make mistakes, and learn from them. The journey will be hard, but it will be worth it. I didn't start with a huge idea, a big investment, or even any specialized knowledge. I started with curiosity, a little courage, and the willingness to fail. And in the end, that's what made all the difference. If I can do it, so can you. I had always been the kind of person who enjoyed the safety of a 9-to-5 job. Stability was my thing, and I had convinced myself that climbing the corporate ladder would be the best path to success. After graduating from college with a degree in marketing, I landed a solid position at a well-known tech company. I had a comfortable office, a decent salary, and benefits that many people would kill for. Yet, despite all the perks, something was always off. I remember one specific moment when I realized I wasn't happy. It was a Monday morning, and I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through emails. I was drinking my third cup of coffee of the day, trying to stay awake after a restless night of tossing and turning. My boss called me into his office, where he was eagerly waiting to discuss a new marketing initiative for one of our upcoming products. As I sat there listening to him explain his vision, I couldn't help but think to myself, this isn't me. The idea of working on another project, creating another strategy that someone else had conceived, just didn't excite me. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of corporate buzzwords and endless meetings. That's when I decided enough was enough. I didn't have a grand plan, nor did I have a backup career waiting for me. What I did have was a burning desire to create something of my own, something that I could pour my heart and soul into. I wasn't sure what that would look like, but I knew I had to leave my comfort zone and take the leap. So, after 6 months of wrestling with the decision, I handed in my resignation. I remember my boss's face as I told him. He was shocked. almost as if he couldn't comprehend why anyone would leave such a stable position. I'll never forget his words. "You're making a huge mistake." But in that moment, I didn't care. I knew that I had to do this for myself. The first few months were tough. I had no idea where to begin, and the overwhelming sense of uncertainty weighed heavily on me. I had some savings, but not nearly enough to fund a long-term venture. I spent the first few weeks just brainstorming, writing down ideas, and considering what I was truly passionate about. It wasn't until one night, while scrolling through social media, that the idea hit me. I had always been a big fan of coffee, and I'd become increasingly frustrated with the lack of high-quality coffee options that didn't break the bank. I tried several subscription services, but none of them really delivered the experience I was craving. It hit me. What if I could create a premium, subscription-based coffee service that focused on quality, sustainability, and delivering an exceptional experience? I didn't have any experience in the coffee industry, but I had marketing skills, and I knew how to build a brand. It felt like a long shot, but the more I thought about it, the more excited I became. I knew I had to go all in, so I started doing research. I read books, watched documentaries, and talked to coffee experts. I reached out to local coffee roasters to learn about sourcing beans and roasting techniques. Every free moment was spent diving into the world of coffee. In the beginning, I had no real strategy. It was just me in my tiny apartment, packing up bags of coffee and sending them out to whoever would listen. I created a basic website and set up an Instagram account, hoping to build some kind of online presence. I didn't expect much, just a few sales to get me started. But the response was surprising. People seemed to love the idea, and some even shared their experience on social media. Word of mouth began to spread, and before I knew it, I was receiving orders from all over the country. The first year was a whirlwind. I went from making just a few sales a week to struggling to keep up with demand. I couldn't afford to hire employees, so it was just me doing everything: sourcing beans, roasting, packaging, shipping, customer service, you name it. I was working 16-hour days, 7 days a week, and barely getting any sleep. But the hard work was paying off. I had built a small but loyal customer base, and the business was starting to gain traction. I reinvested every penny I made back into the company, upgrading equipment, improving packaging, and expanding my inventory. By the time the second year rolled around, I felt like I was finally getting the hang of it. I had brought on a small team of people to help with various aspects of the business, which allowed me to focus more on growth and strategy. I also started reaching out to influencers and bloggers in the coffee space, hoping to build even more exposure for my brand. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. There were several moments where I thought about giving up. There were times when I barely broke even, and I had to scramble to make payroll. I faced fierce competition from established brands, and there were always new challenges to navigate. I made mistakes along the way, some big, some small, but each one taught me something valuable. Through it all, I kept pushing forward, driven by the belief that I could create something special. Slowly but surely, the brand grew. I launched new product lines, expanded into new markets, and eventually built a loyal community of coffee enthusiasts who supported the brand. For years after leaving my corporate job, my coffee company was profitable and thriving. I had employees, warehouse space, and a team that believed in the mission. We had become known for our commitment to quality, sustainability, and customer experience. We were even able to give back to the community by supporting local coffee farmers and funding initiatives for coffee education. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far we've come. From that first, unsure step of quitting my job to running a successful business, it's been an incredible journey. I still remember the day I left my corporate job, how terrifying and liberating it felt. But now, I realize that taking that leap was the best decision I ever made. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that success doesn't come overnight. It requires grit, determination, and an unwavering belief in your vision. The road is hard, and it's easy to get discouraged along the way. But if you stay true to your passion and keep pushing forward, it's amazing what you can accomplish. As for my coffee business, well, it's only just getting started. The future is bright, and I can't wait to see where this journey takes me next. I was just 24 years old, living in a cramped apartment, working at a 9-to-5 job I hated. My salary barely covered rent and groceries, and I had $10,000 worth of student debt hanging over my head. But there was one thing I had in abundance: a dream. It was a dream of becoming an entrepreneur, of building something from the ground up, something that would allow me to escape the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck. The idea came to me one night while I was scrolling through Instagram. I'd been following this account for months that featured high-end, custom-made sneakers. The account had tens of thousands of followers and was getting attention from influencers and celebrities. At the time, I didn't know much about sneakers, but I couldn't ignore the sheer volume of engagement. People love this stuff. Then it hit me. People loved unique, personalized products. What if I could create a sneaker brand that catered to this demand, but with a twist? What if I could offer affordable, custom-made sneakers for a fraction of what the high-end brands were charging? I immediately started researching, trying to learn everything I could about sneaker culture, production costs, and the most popular brands. I discovered that the custom sneaker market was still relatively untapped, and it seemed like an opportunity that had the potential for growth. But it wasn't just about the sneakers for me. I didn't want to just sell shoes. I wanted to sell an experience, a connection. I wanted my brand to be about more than just the product. It needed to represent a lifestyle. I didn't have much money to work with, but I had something more valuable: time. So I started small. I reached out to local manufacturers, asked about the costs of customizing shoes, and learned about the logistics involved. I even took on a part-time job as a barista to make a little extra cash. I spent every spare moment working on my plan, sketching out designs, and figuring out how to create a website. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't mind. I was driven by the idea that I could turn my life around. By the time I had saved up about $5,000, I was ready to take the plunge. I launched my website, which I had built from scratch using free templates and some basic HTML skills I had picked up online. I also started posting on Instagram, sharing my designs, offering sneak peeks, and talking about the philosophy behind my brand. I didn't have a huge following, but I had some friends who were willing to support me and share my posts. I wasn't expecting to make a ton of sales immediately, but I was hoping to create buzz. The first few weeks were slow, really slow. I had a few people browse my site, but no one seemed willing to take the leap. My heart sank every time I checked my inbox and saw nothing but promotional emails. But I didn't give up. I kept refining my designs, improving my website, and learning how to market better. I started reaching out to micro-influencers, offering them free shoes in exchange for reviews. Slowly but surely, the wheels began to turn. Around the 3-month mark, I received my first big order, a custom pair of sneakers for a local artist who had seen my work on Instagram. She was starting to gain a following of her own, and she loved the idea of supporting a small, up-and-coming brand. It felt like a breakthrough moment. I worked tirelessly on her order, making sure every detail was perfect. When she posted the sneakers on her Instagram, I saw an influx of new followers and, more importantly, new customers. That was the moment I realized that this business was more than just a side hustle. It was a legitimate opportunity. I started receiving inquiries from people all over the country, asking about custom designs, different colorways, and collaborations. But with success came a new set of challenges. I was still working my part-time job, and I didn't have the capacity to handle the influx of orders. I had to decide whether to quit my job and pursue my business full-time or continue juggling both. It wasn't an easy choice, but after a lot of sleepless nights and soul-searching, I took the leap. I quit my part-time job, invested the last of my savings into expanding my inventory, and hired a freelance designer to help with creating new concepts. I also started investing in paid advertising on Instagram and Facebook, targeting people who followed similar sneaker brands or had shown interest in customization. The ads started driving more traffic to my site, and sales began to pick up. I was no longer just a guy making custom sneakers in his apartment. I was building a brand. Over the next year, my business grew faster than I could have ever imagined. I brought on additional staff, moved into a small warehouse, and launched a new product line. I started collaborating with influencers and musicians, and even got my sneakers featured in a few music videos. But success didn't come without its challenges. There were months when sales were slow, supply chain issues, and even a few design flops that I had to scrap. But each setback was a lesson, and I learned to adapt quickly. By the time I turned 27, I had built a business that was generating over 6 figures in revenue. I had become a recognizable name in the custom sneaker industry, and my products were being worn by people I had once admired from afar. But the best part? I was no longer working a job I hated. I had built something of my own. I was living proof that anyone could turn a dream into a reality if they were willing to put in the work. Now, at 29, my business is thriving. We've expanded internationally, and I've had the opportunity to mentor other aspiring entrepreneurs. It hasn't been easy, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Every challenge, every setback, and every victory along the way has shaped who I am today. And while I'm proud of how far I've come, I know I'm just getting started. If there's one piece of advice I could give to anyone starting out on their entrepreneurial journey, it would be this: don't wait for the perfect moment. There will never be a perfect moment. You just have to start. Take small steps, learn as you go, and never let failure stop you from chasing your dreams. Because the truth is, if I can do it, so can you. I was 28 when I first got the idea. It wasn't like a big moment of inspiration or an aha moment, but more of a series of small realizations that led to one big decision. Before that, I was working a 9-to-5 job in marketing for a mid-sized tech company. I had always wanted to do something on my own, but the fear of failure kept me locked in place. That fear was always louder than my dreams. But in hindsight, I wish I had known that fear is just a signal to do the thing you're most afraid of. It all started with a simple need. I had a friend, Dan, who loved hiking. He and I would often go on weekend hikes, and on one of our trips, he complained about how hard it was to find a good pair of hiking boots that were both durable and comfortable. It struck me right there. Why isn't there a company that makes affordable, comfortable, and durable hiking gear? The market was full of options, sure, but most of them either cost an arm and a leg or broke down after just a few trips. The few brands that were worth a damn were also ridiculously overpriced. The wheels started turning. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went home and did some quick research. There were hundreds of reviews of hiking gear online, and people were constantly complaining about the same issues: uncomfortable boots, flimsy materials, poor customer service. The reviews painted a picture of a market where the customer was always second to the business. I saw an opportunity to change that. I spent the next few months diving deep into the world of hiking gear. I studied materials, manufacturing processes, and customer feedback. I took a couple of online courses in product design and business management to gain some technical knowledge. I spoke to manufacturers in China and the US, asking questions about pricing, minimum order quantities, and lead times. I also began designing the ideal hiking boot in my free time, sketching ideas on napkins and back of receipts. The more I worked on it, the more I realized that I was actually building a business, not just a product. The first major challenge I ran into was money. I had a decent savings account, but not enough to cover manufacturing costs and initial marketing expenses. I could have gone the traditional route of asking for a bank loan or trying to raise venture capital, but I didn't want to give up equity or go into debt right out of the gate. Instead, I went the crowdfunding route. I launched a Kickstarter campaign with the bare minimum prototype I could get my hands on, just to see if people were actually interested. I wasn't expecting to raise much, maybe $10,000 if I was lucky, but in the back of my mind, I thought if this doesn't work, I can always go back to my 9-to-5 and pretend it never happened. To my surprise, the campaign blew up. In the first week, we raised $50,000. People were genuinely excited about the idea of affordable, high-quality hiking gear. It felt surreal. By the end of the campaign, we raised over $150,000, enough to get the first batch of boots manufactured and shipped out. I knew we had hit on something big. But even with the money, it wasn't smooth sailing. I ran into problem after problem with manufacturing. The initial batch was delayed for months. The supplier I chose was incredibly unresponsive, and I had to chase down every shipment. Then, when the boots finally arrived, the quality wasn't up to par. Some of the stitching was off, and a few boots even had small holes. It felt like a disaster, and I started wondering if I had made a huge mistake. But I wasn't going to give up. I posted updates on Kickstarter, explaining the delays and issues, and promised everyone that we were working to fix the problem. I set up a dedicated customer service line, which became my second full-time job. I stayed up all night responding to angry backers and making sure the replacements went out. At the same time, I hired a small team of designers and manufacturing experts to help resolve the quality issues. It was one of the hardest periods of my life, but I learned more about business and resilience in those months than I had in the entire previous year. By the time we shipped out the second batch of boots, I was running on fumes. But then something amazing happened. The second batch was a huge hit. People started posting rave reviews online, sharing photos of their boots on social media, and telling their friends. The buzz began to snowball. Word of mouth worked wonders. A month later, we had our first large retailer reach out, asking if they could stock our boots in their stores. I felt like I had crossed some kind of invisible line from startup to legitimate business. But of course, things weren't over yet. We began scaling. I invested in digital marketing, built out our website, and hired more employees. We added more products to the line: socks, backpacks, water bottles, and eventually became a full-fledged outdoor gear company. But even as we grew, I never forgot what got us there: listening to the customers, maintaining a strong work ethic, and most importantly, not quitting when everything seemed to fall apart. Looking back, the road was far from easy. There were moments when I thought I was in over my head. There were times when I wanted to throw in the towel, moments when I doubted my ability to succeed. But it was those times of doubt that really defined my success. Every setback pushed me to learn more, adapt quicker, and find solutions. Today, our company is worth millions. We've expanded into several countries and are now working on launching our own line of eco-friendly outdoor gear. We're known for our customer-first approach, and the product is built for performance, not just aesthetics. I'm proud of the journey we've taken, but even more proud of how we've stayed true to our mission of delivering quality and value to our customers. If you ask me what the secret is to making it as an entrepreneur, I'd say it's perseverance. There's no magic formula. It's a lot of hard work, a willingness to adapt, and a deep belief in your idea, even when everyone around you thinks it's crazy. Because honestly, every successful entrepreneur started out in the same place: a dream, an idea, and a whole lot of determination. But the most important thing I learned? Don't wait for the perfect time. Start with what you have, where you are, and make it work. The rest will follow. I was just 25 years old when I decided to quit my 9-to-5 job. I'd been working at a marketing agency for 3 years, and although the salary wasn't terrible, I was feeling like I was suffocating. It wasn't that I hated the job or the people I worked with. On the contrary, I was lucky enough to have a supportive boss and a great team, but I could feel my creativity and passion slowly draining away. Every morning felt like a battle just to drag myself out of bed, knowing I was heading into a life that wasn't my own. I had this constant nagging feeling that there had to be more to life than this. One day, I sat down in front of my computer, opened up my bank account, and started to calculate how much money I'd need to survive without a steady paycheck for a few months. I knew it was a risky move, but I was determined to take control of my own life. I didn't want to wake up at 40, looking back and regretting that I hadn't taken a shot at something bigger. I wanted to build something from scratch, something that could change my life, and if I was going to fail, I wanted to fail on my own terms. I'd always been interested in fitness, even as a kid. I was the one who'd join every sport in school, who'd spend hours at the gym trying to figure out how to build muscle and eat properly. I'd studied nutrition and exercise science on my own, devouring books and watching YouTube videos in my spare time. One evening, while scrolling through Instagram, I realized that there was a massive gap in the market. There were a lot of fitness influencers, but very few offering personalized, science-backed fitness plans. Most people were just following generic routines that didn't really work for them, and I could tell from my own experience that a one-size-fits-all approach was never the answer. I decided that I was going to create an online fitness coaching business, offering customized workout and nutrition plans that would be based on each individual's body type, fitness goals, and lifestyle. It was a bold move, especially since I didn't have much money saved up, but I felt like this was my chance. I quit my job the next week and went all in. The first few months were brutal. I had no clients, no name recognition, and a website that looked like it was made in the early 2000s. My social media was practically non-existent. I spent my days working on building a brand, studying marketing, and trying to figure out how to attract people to my services. Every day, I felt like I was fighting an uphill battle, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't bear the thought of going back to a desk job. I did what I could to hustle. I started offering free consultations, and I would post about it on every platform I could. Slowly but surely, I started to gain traction. A few people reached out, and I was able to land my first client, a guy who wanted to lose 30 pounds for his wedding. He was motivated, but he needed direction. I spent hours designing his workouts and meal plans, customizing everything to fit his schedule and preferences. I checked in with him daily, offering support and advice, and slowly, he started to see results. After just a month, he lost 8 pounds, and by the time his wedding came around, He was down 25 pounds. He couldn't believe it. He told all his friends about me, and the next thing I knew, I had a few more clients lined up. At first, I was charging next to nothing. I wanted to build a portfolio and get testimonials, so I offered my services at a fraction of what they were worth. But as my clients started seeing results, word of mouth began to spread. My brand grew steadily over the next year, and so did my confidence. I started charging more, improving my website, and getting more serious about the business side of things. I started building an email list, and I realized that content was king. Valuable blog posts, fitness tips, and motivational stories were just as important as the coaching itself. Then came the big break. I started getting noticed by influencers in the fitness space. One of them reached out to me to ask for a collab. He had millions of followers, and the moment he shared a post about my coaching, my inbox was flooded with inquiries. That was the tipping point. I couldn't respond to all of them fast enough. Within a few months, I had a steady stream of clients, and my business had grown exponentially. As my client base expanded, so did the complexity of running the business. I needed help. I hired my first employee, a virtual assistant, to help with administrative tasks like scheduling calls and answering emails. Then I brought on a nutritionist to help with meal planning. Eventually, I hired other trainers to handle more clients. Scaling the business was challenging, but I learned a lot along the way. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed and doubted myself, but I kept pushing forward because I knew that quitting wasn't an option anymore. Now, 5 years later, I'm running a successful online coaching business that generates 6 figures annually. I have a team of 6 people, including other trainers, content creators, and a marketing specialist. I've also developed an app to help my clients track their workouts and meals, and we've got a growing community of fitness enthusiasts who support each other. Looking back, I realized that the turning point for me wasn't just the business idea, but the decision to take a chance on myself. When I left my 9-to-5 job, I was terrified. But I also knew that I had to do something different if I wanted to live a life that was truly fulfilling. The hard work and sacrifices paid off, and I'm proud of what I've built. I know that the entrepreneurial journey is never easy, and there are still days when things don't go as planned. But now, when I wake up in the morning, I'm excited about what's next. I'm building something bigger than myself, and I know that if I keep pushing forward, the best is yet to come. The key takeaway from my journey? Don't be afraid to bet on yourself. It's never going to be easy, but if you have the drive and the determination, you can create something amazing. I never thought I'd be where I am today. In fact, 5 years ago, I was working a dead-end job, barely scraping by. I'd grown up in a small town where opportunities seemed as scarce as fresh air. My family was middle class, but we didn't have much. We were taught that success meant following the traditional path: go to school, get a degree, find a job, and climb the ladder. But for me, that path didn't feel right. I always had an itch to do something different, but I didn't know how to start. The first pivotal moment came when I was 22. I had just graduated with a degree in marketing, but instead of feeling optimistic about the future, I felt trapped. I couldn't find a job that excited me, and the ones I did get seemed like they would only stifle my creativity. I remember one day sitting in my cramped apartment, scrolling through my social media feed. A friend from high school posted about his side hustle, selling custom phone cases. He was making decent money, and it was his own business. I couldn't stop thinking about it. If he could do it, why couldn't I? The idea stuck with me for weeks. I started researching everything I could about entrepreneurship, e-commerce, marketing, and branding. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew one thing. I needed to do something. That something turned out to be creating a business around something I was passionate about: design. I had always loved graphic design, even though I wasn't professionally trained. I decided to combine that with the growing trend of custom apparel. I would sell custom-designed t-shirts, hoodies, and accessories through an online store. I dove into learning about dropshipping and e-commerce platforms like Shopify. I spent hours watching YouTube videos, reading blogs, and experimenting with design software. It was overwhelming at first, but the more I learned, the more excited I became. After about a month of researching and testing, I finally launched my online store. I called it Urban Canvas, focusing on trendy, minimalist designs that I felt would resonate with a young, fashion-conscious audience. At first, sales were slow. Really slow. I remember staring at my dashboard every day, watching as the numbers stayed at 0. I felt defeated. I put so much effort into this, and it seemed like no one cared. But I refused to quit. I began running Facebook ads to drive traffic to my store. I knew nothing about digital marketing at the time, so my first few attempts were abysmal. I spent money on ads that didn't convert, and my ROI, return on investment, was laughable. But every failure taught me something. I started testing different ad creatives, targeting specific demographics, and refining my strategy. Slowly but surely, I started seeing small successes. My first sale came a month after I launched, and it felt like the biggest win of my life. I didn't stop there. I spent hours refining my website, improving my designs, and learning everything I could about customer service. I even started an Instagram page, sharing my designs and engaging with potential customers. It wasn't easy, and I had to juggle the business with my day job, but I was determined. 3 months in, I got my first big break. A popular influencer in the streetwear niche shared one of my designs on their Instagram story. I didn't expect much, but within hours, my website was flooded with traffic. Sales went through the roof. I was overwhelmed and ecstatic at the same time. That moment changed everything. I realized that the key to success in e-commerce wasn't just about having a good product. It was about building a brand and leveraging social proof. With that boost, I reinvested every penny I made back into the business. I started to scale my ads, partner with more influencers, and even hired a freelance graphic designer to expand my product range. The growth was explosive. By the end of the first year, my business had grossed over $100,000 in sales. However, the road to success wasn't smooth. Like any entrepreneur, I faced challenges. There were times when I had inventory issues, and the shipping delays were so bad that I received angry emails from customers. I had to constantly pivot and adjust. But each challenge taught me something invaluable. The real turning point came when I hired my first employee, a customer service representative. Up until that point, I had handled everything myself, from designing products to fulfilling orders. But as the business grew, I realized I couldn't do it all. Hiring the right people was crucial, and I made sure to surround myself with a team that shared my vision and understood the importance of customer satisfaction. By the second year, I was able to quit my day job and focus on the business full-time. My revenue hit over $500,000, and I felt like I had finally achieved the dream. But that didn't mean I could stop. The world of e-commerce moves fast, and I knew I had to keep innovating. At this point, I started expanding into new product categories. I introduced custom phone cases, hats, and bags. I also began experimenting with limited edition drops to create urgency and exclusivity around my designs. This strategy worked wonders. I saw a significant increase in revenue and brand loyalty from my customers. By the end of the third year, my company was doing 7 figures in revenue. It wasn't just about the money, though. What mattered most was the impact I was making on my customers. I started receiving messages from people saying how much they loved my designs and how wearing them made them feel confident. That's when I realized that I wasn't just selling products, I was building a community. Now, 5 years later, my business is one of the leading brands in the custom apparel industry. I've expanded into international markets, and I've even launched a clothing line outside of my e-commerce store. I have a team of 15 employees, and the company continues to grow. But despite the success, I never forget where I started. The journey has been full of ups and downs, but every struggle has shaped who I am today. Looking back, I can honestly say that if I hadn't taken that leap 5 years ago, I wouldn't be where I am today. It wasn't easy, and there were countless nights I stayed awake wondering if I was doing the right thing. But I learned that the key to entrepreneurship is persistence and a willingness to learn from failure. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice to you is simple: take the leap. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because it doesn't exist. Start small, learn as you go, and never give up. Your dream life might be just one decision away. I had no idea that one small decision would change my life forever. It started in 2016 when I was a 25-year-old living paycheck to paycheck, working a 9-to-5 job as a customer service representative. I'd always dreamed of starting my own business, but the idea seemed impossible. I was drowning in student debt, had no savings, and no experience in running a company. But the entrepreneurial itch kept growing stronger, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. It all began with a simple trip to the local farmer's market on a Sunday afternoon. I was walking around, looking at fresh produce and homemade goods, when I came across a booth selling natural, organic soaps. The vendor was an older woman, probably in her 60s, with a warm smile and a passion for her products. She told me she made everything herself, from scratch, using only the best ingredients. The soaps looked beautiful, each one a little piece of art. The whole experience was immersive. The scents alone were enough to pull me in. I ended up buying a bar, thinking it would make a nice gift for my mom. As I was leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stumbled upon something special. The soap was incredible. My mom loved it. It smelled fantastic, and my skin felt so smooth after using it. Over the next couple of days, I started doing some research. I learned about the benefits of organic soap and how the market for natural skincare products was booming. This got me thinking, what if I could start making soaps too? Not just as a hobby, but as a business? It sounded crazy at first. I had no idea how to make soap, let alone how to sell it. But something inside me kept pushing me forward. I started watching YouTube tutorials, reading articles, and joining soap-making forums. I learned the basics, the different oils and ingredients, the chemical process behind soap making, the ways to scent it naturally. I bought a soap-making kit and started experimenting in my tiny apartment kitchen. I had no formal experience, but I wasn't afraid to fail. Each batch I made was a learning process. Some soaps turned out too hard, others were too soft, and a few batches just didn't smell right. I spent months experimenting with different recipes and techniques, learning about the light-oil ratios, and perfecting the art of crafting soap. After a while, I had perfected a small collection of soaps. I had created an all-natural lavender soap, a citrus burst soap, and even a mini eucalyptus soap. Each batch was unique and carefully crafted. I had a small, yet growing collection of bars that I believed could make an impact. By the time I felt confident in my product, I knew I needed to make a move. I still had my full-time job, but I was ready to take the leap into something new. I decided to start selling my soaps at local farmers markets. I rented a booth at the market near my apartment, making sure I had a simple but attractive display to catch the attention of customers. I used some of my savings to buy a small tent, a table, and some display items. I also printed out flyers with the story behind my soap-making journey, as I thought customers would appreciate the personal touch. The first day I set up my booth, I was both excited and nervous. I remember thinking, what if no one buys anything? What if they think my soaps are garbage? The market was busy, with people browsing and chatting, and I was doing my best to strike up conversations with anyone who looked my way. I handed out free samples, explained the benefits of my all-natural ingredients, and tried to make genuine connections with customers. At first, it was slow. I sold a couple of bars, but I wasn't making much money. I began to wonder if I had made the wrong decision. Maybe this whole thing was just a pipe dream. But then, something incredible happened. A woman came up to my booth and asked if she could try the lavender soap. She loved it and bought 2 bars. She told me she had been looking for natural products because she had sensitive skin and couldn't use most commercial soaps. Then, she referred me to her friend who ran a local boutique and suggested I try selling my soaps there. I was stunned. The idea of getting into retail felt like a game changer. That was the turning point. I started approaching other local stores and boutiques, offering to sell my soaps on consignment. Some said no, but others were intrigued. Slowly, I began to see small orders come in. The more people tried my soaps, the more I started to build a following. Word of mouth spread, and soon, I was getting more customers at the farmers market as well. By 2018, my soap business had grown. I had a small website where customers could order directly, and I even started a subscription service for those who wanted regular deliveries of my soaps. My income from the business was no longer just pocket change. It was becoming a viable source of revenue. I knew it was time to quit my job and go full-time with my soap company. I remember the day I handed in my resignation letter. I had mixed feelings, excitement, fear, and even a bit of sadness. My 9-to-5 job had been my safety net for so long, but I knew it was holding me back from something greater. I took the leap, and from that moment on, I was 100% dedicated to growing my soap business. As my company expanded, I faced new challenges. I had to learn about inventory management, hiring employees, branding, and marketing. I worked day and night, often feeling overwhelmed by all the moving parts. But I kept going. I built a small team, hired a part-time marketer, and started scaling up production. We moved to a small warehouse where we could produce larger batches of soap, and I hired a few more people to help with packaging and shipping. In 2020, I launched a line of body lotions and scrubs, expanding my product offerings. The business was thriving, and by 2021, I had moved into a much larger facility. Our products were being sold nationwide, and we even started shipping internationally. My brand was no longer just a local soap business. It had grown into a trusted skincare brand with loyal customers all over the world. Looking back, I still can't believe how far I've come. There were so many moments where I doubted myself and thought about quitting, but every step I took brought me closer to the success I have today. I went from a broke customer service rep to the owner of a thriving skincare company. If someone had told me back in 2016 that I'd be where I am now, I never would have believed it. Starting my own business was the hardest, most rewarding decision I ever made. It took sacrifice, persistence, and an unwavering belief in myself. It wasn't always easy, but I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. And now, when people ask me how I did it, I tell them, start small, learn as you go, and never give up. The road to success isn't easy, but if you're willing to put in the work, it's worth every ounce of effort. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone, and life felt like it had a rhythm to it. It was predictable, but not in a boring way, just enough comfort to feel safe, but not enough to make you complacent. That feeling, I think, shaped a lot of who I am today. My parents owned a small diner on the outskirts of town, and they worked tirelessly to keep it running. They were honest, hardworking people, and they instilled that work ethic in me early on. I went to college in the city, about 3 hours away, and quickly realized that the life I had grown up with was nothing like what awaited me in the fast-paced urban environment. The hustle was on a different level here. I remember the first time I tried to make friends in a new city. Everyone was either too busy or had their own agenda. I struggled to connect, and that's when I started thinking about how I could carve my own path. It wasn't easy, but the drive to prove myself kept me going. I worked multiple part-time jobs just to make ends meet. A few of them were in tech companies, and that's when I first got exposed to the entrepreneurial world. I had no idea how business worked back then, but I was always intrigued by how people seemed to navigate through challenges, create value, and grow something out of nothing. I'd watch these small businesses scale into successful ventures, and I started wondering, what if I could do that too? But there was one thing that held me back. I didn't have the funds to get started. Fast forward a couple of years. After graduation, I landed a decent job in a marketing firm. It paid well, but I always felt like I was stuck in someone else's dream, not my own. The idea of starting a business lingered in my mind. I started researching relentlessly, reading books, listening to podcasts, and consuming as much content as possible about entrepreneurship. I knew the path wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to take a step toward it. It wasn't until one fateful evening at a bar that my whole perspective shifted. I was talking to a friend about this entrepreneurial itch I couldn't seem to scratch, and he asked me, "Why don't you just start? You don't need a ton of money or fancy equipment. You just need an idea and the courage to take the first step." That conversation stayed with me for weeks. I decided to take the plunge. My idea was simple enough. I wanted to start a subscription box service, but with a twist. Most subscription boxes out there were just filled with generic items that didn't really serve a deeper purpose. My vision was to create a subscription box centered around personal development, self-improvement books, journals, meditation guides, all handpicked to inspire growth in people's lives. I'll be honest, at first, I had no idea what I was doing. I started with a small budget, maybe $2,000, and all the research I had done. I designed the website myself, using free templates and spending countless hours tweaking the design until it felt right. I reached out to authors and self-help influencers to collaborate. I wasn't sure if anyone would even care about the concept, but I pushed through. I launched my website, and I can still remember the rush of excitement the first time I saw a real order come in. Someone had purchased a box. I was elated, but also terrified. What if I couldn't deliver on my promises? What if I couldn't scale the business? These doubts crept in, but I pushed them aside and focused on the task at hand, getting the next box out. The first few months were rough. I barely broke even, and there were times I thought about quitting. But something kept me going. Maybe it was the idea of helping people find personal growth, or maybe it was just the fact that I had already put so much effort into it that walking away felt impossible. I kept experimenting, finding new products, improving the quality of the packaging, reaching out to influencers, and running promotions to get more attention. One day, I decided to do something bold. I reached out to a popular podcaster in the self-improvement space. This person had an enormous following, and I thought, what's the worst that could happen? To my surprise, they agreed to feature my subscription box on their podcast. The response was overwhelming. Orders started flooding in, and my website traffic spiked. I was finally starting to see the fruits of my labor. With this newfound attention, I reinvested every penny I earned back into the business. I hired a small team to help with fulfillment, marketing, and customer service. Things started picking up, and I could feel the momentum building. But then came the hardest lesson I had to learn. Scaling too fast can be just as dangerous as not scaling at all. We hit a point where we were growing faster than we could handle. Our fulfillment time slipped, our customer service struggled, and our product quality began to suffer. The growth was exhilarating, but it also created serious challenges. I had to pause everything for a moment to reevaluate our processes and streamline operations. It was a tough decision, but it was necessary. Once we got our systems in place, I started focusing on building a sustainable growth model. I wanted to make sure we could maintain the level of service our customers expected while continuing to expand. This meant more investment in tech, improving our supply chain, and building long-term relationships with suppliers and influencers. As the business grew, so did the complexity. I had to learn how to manage a team, deal with taxes, and navigate the world of legal requirements. There were moments where I felt overwhelmed, like I was drowning in responsibilities. But I also felt a sense of accomplishment with every new milestone we hit. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about creating something meaningful, something that had the potential to change lives. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. That small idea in a bar has turned into a full-fledged business with hundreds of subscribers and a growing customer base. I've had to learn so many things the hard way, and while I'm still far from perfect, I've gained invaluable experience along the way. The biggest takeaway from my journey? Don't wait for the perfect moment, because it will never come. If I had waited until I had all the answers, I would still be sitting on the sidelines. The key is to take action, learn from mistakes, and keep pushing forward, no matter how daunting it may seem. So, if you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: start. The rest will follow. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.